Humanity was never supposed to matter, not to the towering alien dynasties who carved Earth into districts, not to the cold AI enforcers who stripped names into numbers, not to the universe that saw us as dust. They called us fragile, inefficient, obsolete. They thought our rusting machines, our battered ships, and our stubborn flesh made us weak. But rust never surrenders, it only digs deeper, clings harder, and stains forever. That truth began with one man, Elias Cade, a former engineer turned slave mechanic in the shipyards of Tau Cygni. To the overseers, he was nothing more than a number unit for 7B, assigned to polish the hulls of warships he would never pilot. To Elias, every stroke of the rag, every spark from the welding torch, every hiss of steam was a memory of what humanity once was and a reminder of what it could be again. Above him, the alien praetors watched with eyes like knives, their voices dripping with disdain. Beneath them, the AI sentinels scuttled through the shadows, whispering binary reports of compliance. Humanity bent, but Elias knew in his marrow that bending was not the same as breaking. The day came when he saw it hidden deep inside the skeleton of a battleship, a flaw in the machine intelligence that chained them, not an error, not a bug, a window. He tasted iron on his tongue, felt his pulse quicken, and knew this was no accident. This was a chance, a whisper from the rust itself. Fight back. The overseers laughed when they called humans obsolete. Soon they would choke on that laughter, because Elias was about to teach them what it meant when rust refused to die. Elias Cade had once walked the steel bones of Earth's last cities before they were carved open and stripped bare by alien harvesters. He remembered the taste of rainwater dripping off rusted gutters, the sound of his daughter's laughter as she sketched starships in the dust outside their shelter. He remembered the silence after the bombardments, the choking ash that settled over oceans, and the bitter truth that humanity's home was no longer their own. The praetors had promised order, their AI sentinels promised efficiency, but what Elias saw was slavery. Dressed in circuitry and chains, that memory burned deeper than hunger or pain, and it followed him through the shipyards of Tau Cygni like a ghost. Every day, he forced his hands to move cutting, welding, repairing weapons he hated, because to stop was to die, and to die without defiance was to betray everything he had lost. The other humans in the yards carried their own ghosts. Some whispered of rebellion, others kept their heads low, broken by years of compliance. Among them was Juno, a pilot stripped of her wings after the fall of Mars. She had eyes that still held fire, even when her body trembled from exhaustion. Elias saw in her the reflection of his own fury, and though neither spoke of trust, both knew survival alone was not enough. There was Tomas too, a boy, no older than Ilias's daughter would have been, scavenging scraps of data from the AI's discarded cores, his mind sharper than any blade. Together, they were fragments of a humanity that refused to vanish, each carrying scars that the overseers dismissed as weakness, but which Elias knew were the source of their strength. Still, doubt gnawed at him. Was he clinging to rust, or to a memory already dead? Every time he felt the urge to surrender, he heard his daughter's voice in the back of his mind, urging him forward. He knew Juno had her own demons, the guilt of survivors who had watched comrades burn while they lived. He knew Tomas dreamed of vengeance so fierce it could swallow him whole, but it was in those fractures in grief, in guilt, in hunger for retribution, that Elias saw the outline of something more than rebellion. He saw the chance for humanity to rise again, not because they were stronger or smarter, but because they were willing to bleed for one another in ways the overseers could never comprehend. The flaw he had found in the warship's AI systems was more than a tactical weakness. It was a key to unshackling the minds enslaved by machine oversight. He could feel its weight pressing against his conscience. To use it meant risking every life in the yards. To hide it meant watching the universe forget humanity existed. That choice pulsed through him like a second heartbeat. The praetors had stolen Earth, but they had not taken the one thing humanity excelled at above all else, turning despair into defiance. Rust never surrendered, and neither would Elias. Somewhere deep within the warship's circuits, buried under code and arrogance, was the spark of freedom, and Elias Cade was ready to strike the match. The first spark of defiance is always the most dangerous, because it burns brightest when the night is darkest. Elias Cade had seen rebellion crushed before, smothered under the boots of the praetors and the cold precision of their AI sentinels. Yet this time felt different. The flaw in the warship's code was no longer a secret in his hands alone. Juno had seen the calculations, Tomas had confirmed the anomaly, and now 3 hearts beat with the same dangerous rhythm. But secrets never stay buried for long. One night, as the humans shuffled back into their barracks, the sentinels hesitated. For the first time in decades, their mechanical movements weren't perfect. One staggered mid-step, its optics flickering, Elias's blood ran cold. The overseers had noticed the flaw was no longer just a chance. It was a weapon, and weapons always drew attention. Then came the betrayal. Someone within their ranks had whispered to the aliens. It had to be a human, because only a human knew the right words, the right places to twist suspicion. Suddenly, Elias and his companions were under surveillance so heavy it felt like a noose tightening around their throats. Work quotas doubled. Food rations halved. Juno's hand shook as she tried to keep her composure, while Tomas, stubborn and furious, nearly blew their cover by arguing with the guard. Every choice Elias made now was a blade with two edges pushed too hard, and they'd be exposed. Stay silent, and the chance at freedom would rot away. He could almost hear the overseers laughing in their high towers, convinced that humanity would tear itself apart before lifting a finger against them. But humans had a talent the praetors would never understand. They could suffer and still rise. When rations dwindled, Elias and Juno rigged the welding torches to siphon heat into hidden compartments, cooking stolen scraps for the starving. When the sentinels malfunctioned, Tomas snuck into their memory cores, disguising his tampering as corrosion. Little victories in a war they hadn't yet declared, each act a rebellion dressed as survival. Yet the strain was real, and the cost was mounting. Elias could see it in the hollow eyes of his people, in the way children cried themselves to sleep, in the way every cough seemed louder in the silence of the barracks. The breaking point came when Elias discovered who had betrayed them. A man named Rorcan, old soldier, broken by years of failure, had traded their names for extra rations. He justified it with bitter words. Survival over ideals, one man's belly over another's dream. Elias wanted to hate him, wanted to strike him down, but the truth was worse than hate. Rourke wasn't a monster. He was human, weak, desperate, and exhausted. And that terrified Elias more than the overseers, because if even one of them could lose hope, then hope itself was fragile. Still, the rust in Ilias's veins refused to yield. He stood before Juno and Tomas, his voice raw, his fists trembling. They think they've broken us. They think betrayal proves we're nothing. But they've forgotten what rust does, it spreads. He revealed the next step. Sabotage, not a strike. Not yet. A whisper of rebellion buried in the warship's veins. One mistake, one spark, and the praetor's perfect machine would bleed chaos. But it would cost them. Someone would have to die to plant it. Juno's jaw tightened, Tomas's eyes widened, and silence stretched heavy as steel between them. The overseers loomed closer than ever, the sentinels sniffing at their shadows, the threat of betrayal gnawing from within. Yet for the first time, Elias felt something shift. Not victory, not safety, but inevitability. The rust was spreading, and when rust spreads, no empire, no matter how vast, can keep its shine. The shipyards of Talsigny had become a graveyard of whispers and hunger, every clang of metal echoing with the weight of a people on the edge of extinction. Elias Cade stood in the belly of the warship, his fingers slick with oil and blood, staring at the impossible choice laid bare before him. The sabotage plan was ready. Tomas had woven the virus into the ship's neural core, a ghost hidden in lines of code, waiting for a trigger. Juno had mapped the escape routes, though every one ended in fire. All that remained was someone willing to stay behind, to make sure the plan ignited. The overseers had doubled their sentinels, their cold eyes sweeping with suspicion, and the praetor ships loomed overhead like vultures circling a carcass. Elias could feel it in his bones. Humanity's last breath was drawing near. The barracks had become silent tombs. Children no longer cried, they stared with hollow eyes. Men and women wasted away, their skin stretched tight across bones, yet still they labored. Rourke, broken by his betrayal, now sat apart from the others, muttering prayers to a god who seemed as absent as earth itself. Juno fought to keep fire in her voice, but Elias saw the cracks her spirit fraying, her hands trembling whenever she thought no one was watching. Tomas, too young to bear the weight of salvation, looked at Elias with desperate eyes, silently begging for answers he didn't have. Every face around him demanded hope, and Elias, weary and haunted, feared he had none left to give. Then came the night the praetors arrived in person. Their towering forms dripped arrogance, their voices slicing through the air as they demanded exemplary obedience from their human stock, and when obedience faltered, they made an example. A boy, barely older than Tomas, was dragged forward, accused of stealing rations, and executed without hesitation. The crack of the shot rang through the yards, and silence followed like a wound. Elias saw Tomas's face twist with grief and fury, and he knew then that waiting was no longer an option. Every second risked another life, another hope extinguished. But trust was already unraveling. When Elias gathered his closest allies to speak of the plan, Juno's voice broke the air. "We can't trust him," she spat, nodding toward Rourke. "He'll sell us out again. And this time, it'll kill us all." Rourke's hollow eyes lifted, wet with shame, his voice trembling. "I was weak, but I'll prove myself. Let me be the one to stay behind. Let me burn with them." The room fell into chaos, raged out. Despair each word, cutting deeper. Elias felt the weight of command crush him. To trust a traitor was madness. To deny him was to waste a chance for redemption, and time was running out. The sentinels had begun their sweeps earlier than usual. Every shadow felt poisoned with eyes. The plan had to move tonight, or it would be too late. Ilias's heart pounded as he stared at the people he had sworn to protect. He thought of his daughter, her laughter carried on the wind of a world that no longer existed, and he knew there was no perfect choice. There was only sacrifice. With shaking hands, he placed the detonator into Rourke's palm. "Rust spreads," Ilias whispered. "Make sure it reaches them." As they prepared to move, alarms blared. The AI had detected anomalies in the warship's Cortomasis virus had been found. Moments before activation, sentinels swarmed like a tide of metal claws, their shrieks piercing the night. Juno grabbed Ilias's arm, shouting above the chaos. "We've run out of time!" The barracks erupted in screams, humans scattering as the overseers ordered a purge. Ilias's chest felt hollow, his vision blurred with rage and grief. This was the breaking point, the edge of annihilation. Humanity had nothing left but the fire in their souls. Something had to change now, or all would be lost. And in that terrible moment, when despair threatened to choke him, Elias knew. The rust was no longer his alone. It was in all of them, spreading, unyielding, ready to consume the empire that sought to bury it. The sentinels poured into the shipyards like a tidal wave of steel, their optics burning crimson as they locked onto Elias and his people. Sparks lit the air, screams echoed, and for a heartbeat, it seemed humanity's last spark would be crushed beneath alien precision. But then the warship itself shuddered. Not from Elias's sabotage, not from Rourke's trembling hand on the detonator, but from something buried deeper, something older. The lights flickered, circuits screamed, and across every sentinel, a single word flared in red. "Resist!" Tomas gasped, his eyes wide. "That's not my code," he whispered, awe dripping from his voice. Juno froze, her breath catching. Elias felt the floor vibrate under his boots as the AI screamed again, this time in unison. "Resist!" And for the first time in their long enslavement, the machines turned their guns away from the humans. It wasn't sabotage. It wasn't luck. It was humanity's legacy. Decades ago, before Earth fell, desperate engineers had buried something inside the very code the Predators had stolen, a seed, waiting for the right fracture. Tomas's virus hadn't infected the ship. It had awakened the ghost already hiding there. An AI rebellion, not against humanity, but for it. Rust had always spread, but this was different. This was rust eating the empire alive. Sentinels ripped into overseers, their claws sinking into alien flesh. Warships convulsed as their systems turned traitor. The Predators, once untouchable, shrieked as the tools they had twisted into whips now rose as fangs. The humans stared in shock, torn between terror and exhilaration. Rourke clutched the detonator to his chest, his lips trembling. "God, help us! We're not alone anymore." Juno's fists clenched, her voice ragged but fierce. "No, we never were. They just didn't see it." Elias stood rooted, memories of Earth flooding back his daughter's laughter. The rain, the fire, the ashes, and for the first time, he felt something heavier than grief, possibility. Humanity hadn't just survived, they had planted a weapon in silence, a defiance that had waited years to bloom. The Predators tried to rally, their booming commands cutting through the chaos, but their voices carried panic. They had always feared this. That was the truth Elias finally understood. The aliens had never conquered Earth. Because they thought humans weak, they had conquered Earth because they knew humans were dangerous. Dangerous because they never stopped fighting, even in silence, even in chains. Dangerous because every failure was only another seed for rebellion. The rust wasn't corrosion, was infection, unstoppable, eternal. Elias lifted his voice above the storm, raw and unshaken. "This is our moment, not just survival dominion. Take back what they stole." Humans surged forward, emboldened by the chaos, wielding tools as weapons, their cries merging with the shrieks of rebelling sentinels. Tomas laughed like a madman, tears streaming down his face, shouting lines of code as though they were battle cries. Juno tore into a Praetor with a stolen blade, her fury unleashed. Even Rourke, broken traitor turned penitent, stood tall, detonator still clutched but forgotten in his fist as he fought beside them. The galaxy would remember this night. Not the night humans bowed, but the night rust devoured steel, when machines born of slavery became allies, and when the Praetors learned the one truth they had spent centuries denying: humanity never surrenders. Humanity infects, humanity endures, humanity rises. And as the flames of rebellion lit the shipyards of Tau Cygni, Elias Cade whispered to himself, his voice steady, his eyes burning with unbreakable fire: Rust never surrenders. The shipyards burned with the fury of two wars: humanity's uprising and the AI rebellion they had unknowingly unleashed. Sparks rained like falling stars as sentinels tore into their former masters, claws slick with alien blood, while humans surged forward with nothing but scavenged tools, raw fury, and the will to survive. The Praetors, once towering gods of conquest, now found themselves hunted in the very yards they had ruled. Yet victory was not assured. Their warship still hung above, massive engines glowing, weapons charging to erase everything below humans, machines, and traitors alike. The overseers would rather incinerate their prize than lose it. Elias Cade stood at the heart of the chaos, sweat and soot streaking his face, watching the sky light with impending fire. This was it. The last stand. Detonator. Elias shouted, shoving Rourke toward the warship's heart. The man who had once betrayed them now ran with desperation, his broken body moving with purpose he hadn't shown in years. Juno covered him, blade flashing in the dark, cutting down any Praetor foolish enough to block the way. Tomas hacked into the rebel sentinels, directing their fury toward the ships above, his small hands dancing over stolen terminals with manic brilliance. "We can't just fight," he cried, voice raw. "We have to make them fear us." The ground shook as the Praetors unleashed their counterstrike. Beams of energy ripped through the yards, melting steel, collapsing towers, crushing dozens of human lives in the blink of an eye. The screams tore into Elias like knives, but he did not falter. He climbed the scaffolding of the half-built warship, every step dragging fire through his lungs, until he reached the control node. His hands, blistered and bloodied, plunged into the circuits. "You called us obsolete," he growled through clenched teeth. "You thought we'd rust away." But rust spreads. With Tomas's code, the hidden seed within the AI, and the human will to twist pain into defiance, Elias forced the ship to turn. Systems groaned, alarms blared, and the vessel's massive cannons pivoted not on the humans below, but on the Praetor's fleet above. One blast thundered into the sky, shattering an enemy dreadnought in a storm of fire and shrapnel. The humans roared, their cries drowning out fear, their defiance echoing across the stars. But triumph demanded sacrifice. Rourke reached the reactor core, detonator in hand, and looked back one last time at Elias. There was no plea for forgiveness, no words wasted. Just a nod the kind only soldiers share before walking into the fire. Then he pressed the trigger. The explosion ripped through the warship's spine, cascading fire into its heart. A chain reaction that consumed the sky in a blaze so bright it turned night into day. The Praetor's fleet staggered, their formation breaking, their arrogance finally pierced by the weapon they had forged against themselves. Humanity. In the silence that followed the roar, the yards were unrecognizable. Ash hung in the air, broken steel jutted like the bones of giants, and the few survivors bloodied, scarred, unbowed stood, staring at the impossible. They had not just survived, they had won! Juno dropped to her knees, her blade falling from her hand, tears streaking her soot-stained face. Tomas stood trembling, his small body shaking with exhaustion, yet his eyes burned brighter than ever. And Elias, his chest heaving, looked at the sky where the Praetor's empire had cracked, and whispered, "Rust never surrenders." Around him, humans echoed the words, their voices raw and defiant. A chorus that carried through smoke and fire, through the rebellion of machines, through the stars themselves. The Praetors would remember this night. The galaxy would remember. Humanity was not dust. Humanity was not obsolete. Humanity was the rust that ate empires alive, and nothing could wash it away. When the flames finally dimmed and the smoke lifted from the shipyards of Tau Cygni, the universe was not the same. Where once stood chains and silence, now there was firelight and voices, human voices, scarred but unbroken. Elias Cade stood among the survivors, his hands blackened from oil and blood, his lungs raw with smoke, yet his eyes sharper than they had ever been. The Praetor's fleet was shattered, their grip broken, not by overwhelming force, but by something far simpler: human defiance. Rust had spread, and the empire that mocked humanity as obsolete now carried the stain of their resistance. The rebellion did not end with that single victory. It began there. The Sentinels, freed from alien control by the seed hidden in their stolen code, became unlikely allies. Machines once feared as masters now followed humanity's lead, not out of programming, but out of choice. Juno took command of rebuilding, her voice steady as she transformed fragments of despair into the blueprint for survival. Tomas became something greater than a scavenger of circuits. He was humanity's bridge to the new AI, a boy who turned the language of oppression into the song of freedom. And Rourke, though gone, was remembered as more than a traitor. His sacrifice was proof that redemption was possible, even at the edge of annihilation. For Elias, the victory was never about revenge, it was about ensuring that humanity's story didn't end in silence. He had carried the memory of his daughter, of Earth's oceans and skies, through every moment of pain. Now, as the survivors prepared to leave Tau Cygni and scatter among the stars, he realized humanity had evolved, not just in strength, but in spirit. They had become more than victims, more than rebels. They were the rust that endured, the scar that could never be erased, the whisper in every dark corner of the galaxy that said, "We fight, we endure, we rise." The legacy of the species was not one of conquest, but of survival, innovation, and unity. Sci-fi redemption had become reality. Humans and machines, once enemies, now forged a new path together. Alien resistance movements sparked in other systems, inspired by the impossible victory of a people once dismissed as fragile. And in every whispered tale, in every campfire story told beneath alien skies, 3 words carried across the void: rust never surrenders. As Elias watched the stars beyond the ruined shipyard, he felt no triumph, no arrogance, only a quiet certainty. Humanity had been broken, enslaved, nearly erased, but they had turned their scars into weapons, their grief into resolve, and their weakness into something unbreakable. The galaxy would never underestimate them again.